Today, we will be discussing aspects of information literacy. Some of these aspects include definition and origin, history and early human applications, cognition through human evolution, behavioral neuroscience, chemical information, the nervous system, cognitive processes, education, and application.
Definition of information literacy. The American Library Association defines information literacy as the ability to, quote, recognize when information is needed and have the ability to locate, evaluate, and use effectively the needed information. Information literacy is required in all fields, especially in sciences, as a means to obtain, process, and effectively apply useful information.
Hi, my name is Devin Norat, and I'll be presenting the origins of information literacy as well as information literacy throughout history. The concept of quote-unquote information literacy is a very, very new subcategory in the vast realm of the countless concepts of psychology. The term can be broken down into a more colloquial phrase, which we know as information processing. Information literacy itself is a name coined in 1972 by Paul Zurkowski, the president of the Information Industry Association. The whole concept was reconsidered altogether after Lee Buchanel presented his paper on information literacy at Texas A&M University in 1976. This opened the door for many other researchers and psychologists to question the true definition and try to come up with ones of their own. This led to extensive research on the topic and has helped open many organizations on the topic, and many schools have programs dedicated to it. At the start of the 1990s, information literacy was widely considered by many as a literacy continuum of its own. This inspired the United Nations General Assembly to begin a 10-year period in effort to reduce illiteracy among the general population of the United States. Now let's take a look at the next slide. The term information literacy itself is essentially the benchmark to understand how well one processes information. We use this ability every day and is essential to not only to students, but every functioning human being in the world. This process is used in many areas, but the most apparent setting information literacy is tested in is problem solving. In order for us to have to pull information and perceive situations, a problem and challenge must arise in which we must apply knowledge. In 1972, Alan Newell and Herbert A. Simon defined a problem as a situation where there's a difference in where you are and where you want to be. This is where information literacy is applied to close the gap between the two. This is shown by Lovett in 2002 as it described problem solving as the use of information to meet a specific goal. Many cognitive processes and activities go on within the brain while solving a problem, but these innate procedures can be broken down into 4 simple steps. These 4 steps were created by George Polya in 1957, which includes understanding that a problem exists, making a plan, carrying out the plan, and looking back to see if you succeeded. Information literacy's history is short, but with the current technology we have at our expense, the possibilities for the future are endless.
Hello, my name is Brianna, and I'll be talking about information literacy and how it has been a part of human evolution. So, information literacy is obviously defined as the ability to acquire and use information and retrieve it, store it, and potentially share that learned information with other beings. And this exact process has enabled early humans to learn to develop primitive technologies such as stone tools, fire, and basic agricultural tools. So first, hominids feared uncontrolled fire. But eventually, these early humans learned to control fire or just start and stop the fire as they needed. So starting a small fire would become a routine at night, and early humans were able to use this fire to fend off any creatures or to keep a light at night. This indicates that humans were able to see a problem, which was to be scared of the fire, but then solve this problem by learning to use the fire and use it as needed, to their own benefit. Similarly and subsequently, these early humans learned to cook, and they noticed that the process made food easier to chew, more pleasant to taste, and better preserved due to the smoke. In this, we can see that information literacy is a very important and useful skill for humans to have, as it has allowed us to create these basic tools that would eventually become computers and everything today. Cognition is also required in the process of information literacy, and throughout human evolution, other mental processes and actions have developed as well. Research from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology suggests great apes were able to quantify items in their environment. They were also able to add and subtract quantities. But in another study, gray apes were unable to understand correlation between shapes of tools and the performance of these tools in certain tasks. Much later in time, Homo sapiens have brains 3 times larger than those of the gray apes. One of these areas of the brains have gained greater mass is the neocortex, and this is because different areas of the brain grow at different rates. And so functionally, this development of this area of the brain likely allows for greater control of voluntary actions, such as fluency and independence in language. An area of the neocortical region, known as the dorsal interparietal sulcus, is seen as activated while learning to create tools. The only issue with this is that the test was performed on Homo sapiens, so we don't know if the neocortical region was as developed in the time of earlier hominids. But these results still prove that the human brain has developed throughout history. And thus, because learning has changed, the results of this experiment show that information literacy is more refined as time progresses. The processing of information begins with attention, sensation, perception, and learning. Information is then stored and later retrieved to aid with processes such as problem solving, critical thinking, and communication. However, with the ongoing rise of technological advancements that assist people with many day-to-day tasks, information literacy has become exceedingly important. The ability to interpret, store, and retrieve information received will remain of great importance, especially in a time where information is omnipresent and society is constantly being subjected to data. With the availability of technology and computers and other electronics like that, data information can be viewed easily and given a glance, but this increased reliability on technology may be diminishing our ability to think critically and actually store the information, since we are able to get our information from anywhere. So while media and information and technology is available everywhere, and this aids us with learning in some aspects, the drawback is that since we are able to so readily get info, we could be possibly doing us some harm and not exercising our problem-solving skills.
Humans are able to process information from both external factors like when you touch something hot, or when you look outside and you see a tree or something, as well as from internal sources like a thought that you have or a command to move a muscle. Information is transmitted either electrical or chemically, and this includes both information like conscious thoughts as well as the information that cells use to communicate with each other to work together as a tissue or an organ. There are two types. There are two ways that information is transmitted in a human. These can be either electrical or chemical. The action potential. This is when a neuron is at rest, it is polarized, so the inside is negatively charged while the outside is positive. Giving it a net charge of about negative 70 millivolts. When a neuron is stimulated, ion channels open, allowing sodium ions to diffuse inside and potassium ions to diffuse outside down their concentration gradients. This depolarizes the cell and it creates an action potential. This action potential causes the nerve cell to become excited, and this sends an electrical signal. When this signal might create a response, or it would be sent to other neurons, or maybe the rest to other parts of the body. And when the stimulation ceases, sodium-potassium pumps actively transport the sodium ions back inside and the potassium ions back outside, which brings this neuron back to the polarized states, which would stop the electrical signals and will stop the impulse from continuing. Chemical information. These include major chemicals that are used to send information include hormones and neurotransmitters. Hormones are chemical signals released by glands of the endocrine system. They are often used for long distance signaling or sending information to the entire body, because hormones are sent through the circulatory system, and that way your entire body would pretty much get the hormone, because your blood has to go to all cells in your body because your cells need nutrients like oxygen. Examples of hormones include epinephrine, testosterone, and estrogen. Neurotransmitters are chemical signals that are sent between neurons across a synapse. Neurotransmitters are sent across the synapse by exocytosis, where like a little bubble forms and it's pushed out to push out the neurotransmitter, and it would go across the synapse into the receiving neuron, which has receptors, and the neurotransmitter will bind to those receptors, and when the receptor gets the neurotransmitters, the receiving neuron might respond by creating action potential and becoming excited, or it could be inhibited. So if it already was functioning, the neurotransmitter might prevent it from continuing its signaling. A significant example of neurotransmitter is acetylcholine, which causes muscles to contract. The nervous system is the system that controls information processing in humans. Two parts are central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The brain is the main control center for information in humans. The brain consists of four parts: the cerebrum, cerebellum, limbic system, and the brainstem. The cerebrum controls things like logic, language, perception, movement, and the senses. The cerebellum controls balance and movement. The limbic system controls things like emotions, memory, and the brainstem is the most primitive part of the brain, and it controls things necessary to survival, like your heart rate, circadian rhythm, and breathing.
Good day, my name is Dominique Tatem, and today I will be discussing information literacy cognitive processes. We will begin with a basic definition of information literacy and cognitive processes, and then we'll go more into the theoretical theories, and then we will basically discuss how education plays an important role in cognitive development and cognitive processes. So cognitive development is the emergence of the ability to think and understand. Basically, thinking allows us to manipulate our thoughts, process information, and decision making, which shapes our world interactions. The cognitive process correlates to information literacy in various ways. To name a few aspects, including perception and learning, and how knowledge is acquired through study, investigating, observing, and experience. Cognitive development is the emergence of the ability to think and understand. The importance of cognitive processes and development in information has become increasingly crucial component in an individual's everyday life. Oftentimes, information literacy requires cognitive thinking skills, logical and even technical skills, which in today's 21st century builds the foundation for lifetime learning. Being cognitively aware promotes the ability to independently think, learn, research, formulate opinions, ask questions, communicate effectively with peers and people in general, solve problems, decision making, and building self-esteem. This helps us to understand what is real and relevant, whether it's in regards to school or overall life and overall interactions. Now we will discuss some of the major theories and concerns surrounded by information literacy and how cognitive processes correlates again. We will begin with Jean Piaget. Jean Piaget was a philosopher who played a role in the establishment of this field, as we know. During Piaget's theoretical study, he proposed 4 stages of cognitive development. We're not going to go in depth into these 4 stages, but we will list the 4 stages. The 4 stages include the sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational period. These 4 stages have since fallen. However, his view on prominent changes in cognition with age is still being considered today. There still tends to be some controversy around the nature versus nurture topics. The question that keeps arising is whether or not cognitive development is evaluated on an individual's innate qualities or based on life experiences. Now, contemporary psychologists view nature as hereditary and innate, which is basically something that we were born with or passed down through genes, while nurture is viewed as the result of experiences within the environment. According to early scholars, the two were evaluated and debated by their contributions to a specific type of behavior. In contrast, the most updated research shows that this has been identified as a false dichotomy, which shows substantial evidence that from birth, genes play an important role in the interaction of events and experiences in the environment. Next slide, we will list the aspects of cognitive skills: long-term and short-term memory, auditory processing, visual processing, and processing speed, logic, and reasoning. On the next slide, we will discuss the issues in education and how it's related to cognitive development processes. Now, education development includes preparation, acquiring new knowledge, and rehearsing and connecting background information. The cognitive process in information literacy focus specifically on how the brain acquires and utilizes the information that it's acquiring. For example, according to the American Educator Principles of Instruction, in school or in college, an education instructor can provide a great deal of support in cognitive development. Later, we will discuss the different ways that they can provide support. This can be achieved by teaching new materials in proportion amounts, smaller amounts, briefly reviewing previous learning concepts and practices to refresh the memory, as well as providing accessible and necessary background information, providing practice and reviews, and correcting errors. Another important factor would be engaging and interacting with students with weekly and monthly reviews, which kind of helps the students to be aware of their weaknesses and know what they need to improve in moving forward. Studies show that when knowledge is linked to previous knowledge, as well as embedded and rehearsed, the student will be more effective in fully grasping and understanding the information and the material. The last slide basically shows an image of critical thinking and information literacy. And it basically shows you that critical thinking skills and attitudes are necessary for being information literate. And this is how the two combine and correlate. Being information literate is essential for critical thinkers. You have to know how to critically think, which may include an individual's ability to read and write, and usually consists of evaluating, reflecting, and working towards an overall goal, understanding the underlying issue. And the last image shows basically a hierarchy of cognitive domain: remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. And that concludes my presentation.
Stages of cognition. A recent study has shown that the process of cognition consists of 4 stages: encoding, planning, solving, and responding. The study also found that the planning took longer if the problem presented had a less obvious solution. Solving takes longer if the solution can only be achieved after many steps or calculations. Responding took longer when the actions required to solve the problems were more complex, as from Per Anderson in 2016 in his journal article. Conclusions and applications of information literacy. Information literacy is the ability to recognize when information is needed and have the ability to locate, evaluate, and use effectively that needed information. Now, two key figures which have been covered previously are Polya in 1957, Newell and Simon in 1972, and Lovett in 2002. Polya created a four-step process to show how to effectively solve problems. Newell and Simon describe a problem as a difference from where you are and where you would like to be. And in 2002, Lovett defines problem solving as the use of information to meet a specific goal. Information literacy is very dependent on the biological aspects of psychology, as the essence of psychology often falls upon biological structures. An example would be the frontal lobe, which is key for logic, language, movement, and emotions. There's also the parietal lobe, which is key for perception, movement, orientation, recognition, as well as the occipital lobe, which is mostly used for sight processing and things of that liking. And lastly, the temporal lobe, which is the fourth and final lobe, which usually has to deal with senses, memory, and speech. So all of those have something very important to do with information literacy. There's also things like the spinal nervous systems, as well as the endocrine systems, which send chemical messengers all up and down the nervous systems, the spine, which control movements, thought, cognition, all sorts of things key for information literacy. Another important feature is that as technology improves, so does the importance of information literacy. Whereas now we can have whole databases ready at our fingertips, and we can have anything stored digitally at a moment's notice. Some drawbacks of this can be that an overdependence on this high tech can be detrimental towards our ability to think critically. As for applications, information literacy can be used in many fields of work dealing with numbers and assessment of statistics. For an example, working in the auto design industry, architecture, marketing, management, and other fields of work can be very dependent on a good sense of information literacy, like how to work with statistics, who to market your products to, how to work with certain materials, amounts, keeping tabs on shipments and employees and things of that matter. It's also good for interpreting statistical data, making sure that the statistics you're looking at and identify with correlation and not really causation of what you're studying with those statistics.